A lot of people online say that this market is just like 08, 09. It's a bubble. And we know that's not true. I've done other videos on that. You can check those out because I talk through some of the factual things of what happened in 08, 09 and that's not happening today. But I read an interesting article that talked about how this market's actually more like the 1980s. And everybody goes, really? 1980s? I thought that too. So we're going to delve a little bit farther into that today. What's up, everybody? Mark Cannonre, your local realtor here in the Phoenix area, and today we're talking about why this market looks more like the 1980s instead of 08, 09. I know, unpopular opinion, but before we get into any of that, if you guys find value in my channel or in this video, like it, share with your friends, I'd appreciate it, but let's get right into this, guys. So I'm going to break a lot of stuff down today, show you charts, articles, different things like that, put all that stuff in the descriptions, that way you guys can see it. But really, I read a Bank of America article that actually had said, hey, this market's starting to shape up more to look like the 1980s than it does 08, 09. Now listen, I know 08, 09 is a hot topic because everybody wants to predict the next crash. And that's why you see all these videos about it, about everything's about to crash, because we know that the market accelerated really fast. And listen, we haven't really seen anything like that before. So people assumed it's a bubble, it's gonna crash. Now listen, I've done other videos on 08, 09, so please go watch those because we know with the subprime mortgages and the bad lending standards that is what happened in 08, 09. We do not have that same stuff today. Now listen, is affordability an issue? Yeah, it is. Prices necessarily are an issue, it's affordability because people could afford the housing prices, especially here in like Phoenix, at 3%, but at 7%, they can't. So it's one of those that we have an affordability issue. And so that's where people are still harping on the 08, 09 thing, but I really do think this article has some stuff to flesh out. That's why I read it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me do some more research on that. So I'm going to share some of that research today and time will tell, but it's starting to look like this is going to turn more into the 1980s than 08, 09. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to get right into it. I'm going to share some graphs, some charts with you, show you some historical data. Because again, talking about 08, 09, people use 08, 09 because it's recent enough, right? And so they want to use fear. The media does it. People online that want you to subscribe and like their videos because they make money off of that stuff. They don't offer solutions. They're just saying, freak out. And it's like, that's not conducive. You have people who are like that. World is crashing, burning. And then you have people who are overly optimistic. And a lot of those are salespeople just trying to get you to do something so that way they make money. We need to be in the middle where the facts are. And looking at, especially historical data, what does it tell us? All right. And so what we're going to show you is I'm going to show you a chart right here about the 1980s and on. Okay, so in this chart, you're going to see a lot of different things. So the first thing you're going to see is that line, and that is mortgage rates. So back in the early 1980s, back when they had the recession back then, what was going on? They had super high inflation, crazy inflation. Does that sound familiar? It should, because we have that now. Now, they had such high inflation, they said, okay, we have to curb this, and they really went after it. And they raised interest rates dramatically, much more dramatically, in my opinion, than they did recently for us. So they were trying to curb it quickly. And yeah, it caused a recession. But what happened in that time was you saw, anytime there's a recession, you usually see interest rates come down. So they ramped up interest rates. They got up to mortgage rates of 16 to 20%. That's nuts. Can you imagine having a 16 to 20% mortgage? That's crazy. Now, granted, everything back then was cheaper. I understand. Not everything costs as much. Now, today, things cost more, people make more. That's just the way it goes with inflation and different things like that. But they had crazy inflation, so they were trying to curb it. So in trying to curb it, they have that line. So the mortgage rate started dropping over time. It did. So like right now, we're sitting around 7 to 7.5%. So we're not anywhere near what they were. But what we're also seeing is you see those gray lines on the chart. Those gray lines represent recessions. And so there has been, since 1970, there's been about 8 recessions. Now, those vary in how bad they were and everything like that. And obviously, 08, 09 was a crash. It was horrific. And it's one of those that, again, there's only been 2 of those in history. The Great Depression and 08, 09. That were just horrific and it was awful. We've had other recessions. And yes, recessions are bad. Those are not good things. But then the question becomes, okay, what happened during those recessions to housing prices? Well, that's a great question. So what we're going to see is 1980, from this chart, housing prices rose 6%. 1981, housing prices rose 3%. And the recession really started probably the end of 1980 in that recession. So it's one of those that you saw in 1980, 1981, houses prices still rose. Now, 1991, we had a small recession. Houses prices came down a little bit. But then 2001, we had a small recession. Housing prices still went up 6%. 2008, 2009, obviously, major crash, came way down, 20%. But then 2020, we had a small recession. Housing prices went up 6%. And then it ballooned from there. Obviously, we know that housing prices continued to go up way more. And so that's where we have to understand that a recession doesn't mean housing prices come way down. Sometimes it can, but that is not always the case. So here's another chart that shows for 1980 on, I mean, there's more dates I can give you, but from those dates, you're seeing that home prices, so it's similar to what the other things I was just showing you, but you see home price from 1980 to 1981 went from, I think it's the median, went from 64,000 to 68,000, almost 69,000, and it kept going up from there. So just because there was a recession, just because there were super high mortgage rates, it didn't slow it down. Now, why is that? And that's a great question. So one of the main reasons that it didn't slow down was because of who was buying at that time. So back in the early 1980s, who was coming of age, prime age to buy homes? Boomers. Boomers were becoming of prime age to buy homes back then. That's what they were doing. Now listen, people got really creative back then to buy homes, and there's so many different things that we don't really see today that people did. And I'm not going to go into all those, but they got really creative to buy homes because they wanted to, whether it was getting married, to have a dual income, or whatever it is. They were doing different things. Like I read one story that said that people didn't have furniture for like a year. And it was like, whoa, that's crazy. But people were becoming prime age of boomers back then, so they really wanted to buy. Well, what's happening right now? The same thing is happening with millennials. Millennials are becoming in the prime age of actually buying homes. And so we have high interest rates, but we have people who are getting good jobs. We have people who are paying. And listen, there's a lot of people who aren't buying because prices are so high. That's very true. But we're going to look all the way back to 2020. So 2020, you're going to see this chart here. And in 2020, millennials got to 37% of the people buying homes. Boomers were at 32%. Gen X is, we'll see in this chart, has been hovering around 22, 24%. They're staying about the same. But then we see in 2021, millennials then go to 43%. Wow, big jump. Boomers go down 29%. So 2020, 2021, we see a massive jump in home buyers for millennials. And they're really growing. They're coming in that prime age to buy homes. Now, then we see 2022, and it changes a little bit. And this is actually really interesting. So millennials are at 28%, so they went down, but boomers went up to 39%. And people were like, what on earth? And I say the same thing, what on earth? And I started kind of reading different articles about this, and I think there's a couple things. One, 2022 is when we hit our peak, right? That's where interest rates started getting really high, and people started slowing down from buying, and we're getting out of the pandemic and all of those different things, And so one of the things I actually read an interesting article about was boomers have increased because, one, boomers have the most equity, right? In other videos I've done, it's like almost 70% of homeowners have almost 50% or more equity in their home. That's a lot. So boomers having a ton of equity. One of the things we learned from the pandemic was people wanted to live near their family members because when everything shut down, people were isolated. And so one of the things we saw was boomers who have a ton of equity sold their homes and bought near their family. We see a lot of people relocating to be closer to family, be in closer communities. Now, that may not be the only reason for this, but I think a major reason of this is boomers had the most equity. Millennials are just starting to buy. They don't have all that equity yet, but boomers do. And so we've seen, okay, yeah, there's higher prices and interest rates, but listen, there's a lot of boomers out there that sell their homes, they own them outright, and they go buy a house cash or a very low mortgage. So for them, it's not as big of a deal with interest rates because they're having so much to put down. So that's really interesting to see how the charts are showing that millennials were really increasing, and then last year it changed. I'll be interested once we get into next year to see what this year actually came as far as what the numbers look like. Okay, so I've thrown a lot at you, showed you a lot of different charts. I'll put all that stuff in the description. If you want to see the links or read the articles, you can go see that stuff. But ultimately what it comes down to is right now, no, this is not a bubble. It's not just going to crash and burn like everyone's saying. And again, go watch my other videos about the 08-09 stuff. The reality is right now is we don't have inventory. Inventory is still low. Like here in Phoenix, normal is 25,000. We're still around 16,000. Now it's coming up slowly but surely. But the hard thing is going to be is if interest rates do go down, which I'm going to talk more about this next month. I'm going to do a video, kind of a forecast for 2024. But because we have an election coming up and we have, possible recession and whatever it is, I have a feeling they may lower interest rates just to benefit those people. And it's one of those that if they lower the interest rates, let's say we get in the fives at all interest rates, you're going to see people selling, you're going to see people buying, and that will cause prices to go up because we have so many people on the sidelines, especially millennials, who are on the sidelines waiting for lower rates. And so it's one of those that is kind of a hard thing because it's like, okay, if rates do come down, which could happen next year, then people may come flooding back in the market. Yes, we will have sellers come back in, but I have a feeling we have more buyers coming back in. And so it's one of those, I'll talk more about that next month when I do my video. I'm going to actually show some stuff and break some of that stuff down. I'm doing a lot of research over the next month. But guys, if you have questions about this, I would love to talk with you. And again, there's no commitment there. It's just, if you want to talk about it, if you want to brainstorm on this, I would love to do that with you. My information is below. I'm here to help however I can because, again, no one's situation is the same. Your situation is different from everyone else's. And it's about what's best for you. It's not about me. It's not about anything else. It's about what's best for you and helping you see what you can achieve to try and buy a home. I'd love to talk with you about it. Guys, you've been listening to The Real.